As the demanding schedule slipped away from them, the two teams were beginning to feel the strain.
The stress level was very high throughout the job. As we got started, it was clear that some of our basic working assumptions weren't right. That if we kept on the path we were going to go on, we weren't going to make it.
It wasn't just faulty concrete that had caused delay. Now the floor laying process was creating a bottleneck. Laying floors was the most time and labor-intensive part of the construction process. In a normal Malaysian building, it took up to 10 days per story. And because the floor helped stabilize the whole building, they couldn't build the next floor on top until it was ready. Wong Chin Fung led one of these floor-laying teams. They were fully aware they were holding things up.
I worked on Tower 2, and we competed with the contractor on Tower 1. So, every day when we went to work, we had a look at what they had done on Tower 1 and what we'd done on Tower 2.
They redesigned the flooring system from scratch to speed it up. They pushed the cycle time down to 4 days, but that didn't make things any easier. They still had to go over to 24-hour working, 7 days a week. It became the site that never slept. Long hours took their toll.
Oh, we had to work 7 days a week as well, you know, and that was all. We dedicated the 2 years of our lives, you know.
The superhuman efforts started to pay off. Construction was at last back on track. Bob Pratt's Tower 1 stood at 64 floors. John Dunsford's Tower 2 still lagged behind at 60. The race was on. They were now more than 300 meters up, towering above every other building in the city. Tiredness and stress led to mistakes. The Petronas Towers site was one of the safest in the world. But working almost a third of a kilometer above the Earth, the slightest error could be fatal. Even with the best safety precautions, it was an awesome height. Slender scaffolding, hard hats and safety ropes were all that stood between workers and the immense drop. Even the most experienced could find themselves paralyzed by fear.
So I looked down. There were 42 levels below me. If we fell down, we'd fall 42 levels straight down.
Mid-1995, 18 months to go. As the towers took shape, they began to dominate the Kuala Lumpur skyline. Beneath the skywalkers building the exterior, attention now turned to the inside of the towers. It wasn't enough to build the walls. These had to be living, breathing buildings. The complex was to consist of offices, a shopping centre and an 800-seat auditorium, with 10,000 people using the towers every day. The biggest challenge was getting them where they wanted to go. Elevators take up a lot of space, something the slender Petronas Towers didn't have to spare. The core of a building like the Sears Tower would take up a huge proportion of the floor space of Petronas. They needed a radical new solution. To solve the problem, they brought in Otis, the company who literally invented the elevator. They went for high-speed elevator cars, but they couldn't make them run as fast as they'd like to. People in Asia don't like to go as quickly as Americans. They still needed 4 times the space they had available. It was a real headache for the engineers. Getting people around looked like being the Achilles heel of the Petronas Towers. Then they came up with an ingeniously simple answer. They used what Petronas had plenty of: height. They stacked 2 elevators on top of each other, double-decker cars. When people enter the towers, they choose whether they're going to go to an odd or even floor. For odd floors, they stay at lobby level and use the bottom deck of the car. For even floors, they go up a floor and use the upper deck. 58 double elevators can service both towers. Then they doubled up again. The system uses 2 double elevators in every shaft. An express elevator goes halfway up to what's called the Sky Lobby. And then passengers change to a local elevator. Never more than 70 seconds to reach any floor. This ingenious solution meant the elevator core would be half the size. They hit the final months of 1995, year 5 of the 6-year schedule. Outside in Tower 1, Bob Pratt was still 2 floors ahead of John Dunsford in Tower 2, 72 against 70. He'd led the race from the start. They were finally on schedule. They thought the end was in sight when disaster struck. With a mega build on this scale, progress had to be monitored in depth. Bob Pratt was about to get some bad news.
The most stressful period for me on the project and for the team, at a time when the structure reached about the 72nd floor, our surveying manager came to us one day and said, "I think we've got a little bit of a problem."
Precisely 25 millimeters of problem. The worst had happened. Tower 1 wasn't straight. It was about the width of a thumb off vertical. Even worse, news leaked out, and this was a very public project. It wasn't enough to jeopardize the building's structural integrity, but the Petronas Towers were a prestige venture, and it was an embarrassment, something they could really do without. If Bob Pratt's team carried on the way it was going, the situation would get worse and worse. He was at his wits' end. Even the weather seemed to be conspiring against him.
The thing that I think really stuck you every afternoon, you'd be in the middle of having worked all morning, you'd get to late afternoon, and here would come the typical Malaysian Kuala Lumpur afternoon downpour. People would run for cover, the workers would desert the area, and you'd say, how are we ever going to figure this out? How's it going to happen?
The Tower 1 team had to resist the urge to panic. Carefully, they started to correct the problem, building the tower back towards vertical. The next 16 floors would slant 2 barely visible millimeters back into line. Plans had to be recalculated. It was a setback Bob Pratt could ill afford. John Dunsford in Tower 2 was right on his heels. The race was really hotting up as they moved into the final straight.
Can Tower 2 catch Tower 1? And it was almost every 2 days. I mean, the binoculars were there.
The 2 towers now stood at over 80 floors. But the safety of high-rise buildings was about to become the next nightmare for both teams. The Petronas Towers are now the tallest buildings in Asia, even unfinished, a towering symbol of Malaysia's national pride. A horrific incident 15,000 kilometers away made their very height a source of vulnerability. Oklahoma, April 1995. Timothy McVeigh parked a van packed with explosives outside the concrete-built Murrah Federal Building. The deadly explosion put the world on high terrorist alert. It seemed all public buildings were now at risk from terrorism, especially ones as prestigious as the Petronas Towers. The Oklahoma attack sent the Petronas builders back to the drawing board. They needed to look urgently at provisions for the tower's safety. The first weak spot was right beneath the building, where a bomb could do most damage. Originally, there were 3 levels of parking beneath the towers. Now, people would park under the shopping complex. Some security and life support systems